Hi guys, welcome to Unit 3. I am so excited to be talking about magic books this unit. I hope you enjoyed your reading about grimoires and magic books, which you should have already done a short writing assignment on. Now, because I have so much to talk about Dr. Faustus, I won't have a lot of time to go into that here. Because this is already going to be a super long video, so we just need to jump right in to our discussion of the play. Let's start first by talking about Christopher Marlowe. He's a super interesting character, so I just want to give a little background information on him. In my personal opinion, he's quite possibly the most interesting figure in English literary history, period. So, not only was he unquestionably a brilliant writer, right? His life history is just full of really juicy, it's all speculation. We don't actually have a lot of hard facts, but there are a lot of juicy legends about him. Marlowe was very possibly a government spy in some form of early Elizabethan MI6. He was possibly an atheist. He was possibly gay, and I won't get into all of the backstory of or the nuances of early modern sexuality, but he does have a lot of writing out there about admiring young boys. So there's that. And then finally, he was killed in a bar fight. It was possibly an accident, possibly an accidental killing. It was also possibly a coordinated assassination. We don't actually know. We don't have any way of actually knowing, but it is really fun to speculate about why he was killed, how he was killed, what was going on there. There's just so much interesting, juicy stuff here. Either way, whatever happened in his personal life, what we do absolutely know for a fact is that he is a literary legend, completely fascinating and brilliant person. He is the closest rival to Shakespeare as far as dramatic genius goes, and if he had lived longer, he very possibly could have out-achieved Shakespeare. I mean, that's just speculation as well, but he'd already produced, he was essentially the same age as Shakespeare and had already produced these masterworks before Shakespeare had even really gotten going. So, yes, really, really sad loss for the English literary world, and just a fascinating character. But we're here to talk about the play. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Dr. Faustus. It was written sometime between 1589 and 1592. Your book offers the date of 1590. It's just a guess. It was probably performed on the stage sometime around 1592, but it wasn't published until over a decade later. It first went into print in 1604 in a version that's called the A text. So this is something that's important to know about this play. So it was published in two different versions. So the first one, which is called the A text, was 1604, and then a second version called the B text was printed in 1616. The B text is a little bit longer. I think it's about 600 lines longer. It contains some more funny and clownish scenes and some other substantial differences. We don't really know which version is more quote-unquote authorial. We don't know if there's speculation that the B-text editions were written by someone else. It's possible that lots of different parts were collaborations. We don't know if the B-text versions were performed in Marlowe's lifetime, if they were added afterwards. Lots of things we don't know, but when you're talking about this play, it is important to indicate which version you're talking about, whether it's the A text or the B text, because they are so different. So I had you read the A text for several reasons. First, because it's shorter. You're welcome. Second, because it has all of the pertinent information in it that I wanted us to focus on anyway. I didn't really feel like any of the B text additions contributed to our discussion. And then finally, there is the guess out there that the A text is more authorial anyway. But just want you to know that when you're talking about this play, there are the two versions, and we read the A text. And slight tangent, since most people don't know this, so I feel the need to share this, but most of Shakespeare's, or many of Shakespeare's plays, have sort of the same issue. There are multiple versions that exist of many of Shakespeare's plays. They were printed in quarto forms, then they were printed in later quarto forms or in the folio form. So we have different versions of, Hamlet. Hamlet comes in two very, very different versions. Anyway, so most people don't know that, but it is important to know. If you're ever reading a Shakespeare play, you might be reading a different version than someone else is reading. It's important for interpretation too, to know which version you're talking about. Okay, the second thing that you should know about this story in particular is that Marlowe did not make this story up. Actually, Shakespeare didn't make up most of his stories either. They borrowed and adapted from original sources. So if the story of Dr. Faustus seems familiar to you, like you've heard of it somewhere else, it's probably because you have. The backstory here, there was a real Dr. Johann Georg Faust who lived in Germany, what was the area of Germany, between 1480 and 1541. And he is widely considered the inspiration for this legendary story. So his story was written in German and then translated to English, and Marlowe adapted that English translation into this play. And that translation, that original English translation, is actually available in the back of this book, in the source text, if you care to read that original English translation. But the story also continued in German. It was very popular in Germany, and eventually inspired Goethe's play Faust, which you may or may not be aware of. There was an opera. There's been many novel and film adaptations over time. So just putting that out there. This story is not original. It is not, owned by Marlowe. He was just one of many to adapt this story. But he did it very well, I'll say. It's one of the earliest English literary and best English literary adaptations of it. All right, so on to the text itself. This is one that I'm really sad that we aren't in class to talk about together, because I feel like if we were in class together, we'd spend a lot of time going over summaries of each scene, making sure that you're understanding exactly what's going on, parsing through some of the more difficult language, because I understand that early modern language can feel a bit foreign and difficult, especially if you're not really used to reading early modern plays a lot. It can be hard to pick up on everything that's going on. So my suggestion to you is absolutely feel free to make use of online summaries. So there's a brief synopsis on Wikipedia that's not the best, but it's at least something, or you can look at some other summaries to help you sort of understand if you're struggling to understand what's going on. Just remember, just be aware that there is the A text and the B text version, so any summary you find online may have B text information in it that's not pertinent to the text we're reading. So anyway, just keep that in mind. They can help if you're struggling with the storyline. The play also might be difficult to follow because plot-wise, there's not a whole lot of action necessarily. There is a lot of talking and a lot of thinking out loud about stuff. We could spend weeks and weeks just going over all of the historical allusions, all of the talking about science and philosophy and medicine and knowledge. Like we could do a history of knowledge. And there's all those Latin phrases that get thrown around. If you notice those, there's a lot of allusions in here. And to really thoroughly dig into all of those and to talk about all of the historical context for everything that's alluded to in this play, it would take us weeks. We just don't have the time to do that. So make use of your footnotes. Really read your footnotes. They will help. And maybe make note of any questions, specific questions you have, and we might get around to addressing some of those questions if we get a chance to talk about this in person next week. We'll see at the end of this video. Just use your footnotes and do your best. Do your best to try to grasp and understand what's going on. And of course, know that the thing that I want you to pay attention to the most is how the use of language and books is figuring into the play in general, right? There are so many books that show up in this play. I started counting and I lost count, right? Just so many mention of books, and particularly language and books about the study of magic, right? So this is a fascinating time in European history right now, right? This is sort of late Renaissance period for Europe in general. There's been this massive resurgence of old classical knowledge circulating around Europe, ancient Greek philosophy and science and medicine, and there's this search for more and greater knowledge and all this information, both old, really old information going like all of this knowledge base that was lost and is being rediscovered and found from the classics, and new knowledge that's being developed. So in this society, knowledge is power, right? And importantly, this knowledge is coming from books, right? The printing press, it enables the printing of all of these books, and they get spread around so more and more people can participate and partake of this knowledge. And the books themselves become symbols of power. So magic books take that idea of book power from metaphorical to actual, right? The book itself has power. I hope you were able to read the short article by Keith Thomas about conjuring and magical traditions. I'm going to come back to that in just a second. But first, I want to do just walk you through the play a little bit. We'll see if this is helpful. Just sort of highlights things I want to make sure that you're catching. So let's talk first about the very first scene. So in this scene, Faustus he has already received his doctorate, right? That means he's been approved by all of his colleagues that he is he's a doctor of divinity. That's important. Doctor of divinity. So he has done all his reading, learned everything that everyone thinks is important for him to know, and earned his degree as doctor. And so now we're post that, and he is honestly trying to decide what he's going to study for the rest of his life. Academia worked differently back then. So he's going through, in this very first scene, he's going through his books and all the different topics of books and reading segments from them and talking about them and trying to decide, is this what I want to study for the rest of my life? Is this what I want to be reading for the rest of my life? And one by one, he rejects them. He rejects them for being not interesting, or for being too incomplete, or for being just lacking in interest or whatever. And then, so he rejects medicine, he rejects philosophy, and interestingly, he rejects divinity. He rejects a study of religion, which is pretty interesting, right? Especially for the time. And then he gets to the end there. He picks up a book of magic, and here it is, right? Here's the thing that he finds worthy of more attention, knowledge that's worthy to be gained. These metaphysics of magicians and necromantic books are heavenly. Interesting choice of word there. Lines, circles, scenes, letters, and characters. Aye, these are those that Faustus most desires. Oh, what a world of profit and delight, of power, of honor, of omnipotence is promised to the studious artisan. Further down, a sound magician is a mighty god. All right, so he's decided he's going to study magic. So that's what's happening in the first scene, and you'll notice right after he makes this decision, we hit a good angel and an evil angel that show up on stage. So I just wanted to note this briefly. If you're like, wait, what? Isn't that like a cartoon trope? Yes, it is. It's a 400-year-old cartoon trope, 500-year-old now, however long we are. Even older than that, because Marlowe is borrowing heavily here from what is called a morality play tradition. It's a long tradition of earlier dramas in English vernacular theater that were highly religious and had very stock character figures, like this good angel and this bad angel. So Marlowe's just borrowing from that tradition when he puts them in here. Okay, the scene I really want to focus on. Let's jump to Act 1, Scene 3. This one is a really crucial, important scene, okay? So Faustus has met with a couple other magicians, committed himself to studying this. We've got a few other scholars who are now worried about Faustus's soul. But we come to this scene, right? This is where he performs the conjuring and calls forth his first spirit. And I want you to pay attention to that process here, right? So the first thing he does is he draws a circle on the ground. And within this circle, he writes the name Jehovah forward and backward, right? Plus the abbreviated names of holy saints, figures of every adjunct to the heavens, and characters of signs and erring stars, by which the spirits are enforced to rise. Okay? Interesting, right? That we get symbols and words, names, the name of Jehovah, the name of saints written out, and somehow that has power, right? Then we get that long Latin phrase at the end of that passage. And you'll have to read the translation to understand it. But basically in Latin, he is calling forth the spirit, and he then uses the name of the demon, Mephistopheles. And he's able to call forth the demon using its name. So let's see, like we can pull it all in here, right? We can bring back our Plato at this point. We can bring in our speech act theory at this point. Everything we talked about the magic system in A Wizard of Earthsea. Everything we talked about with writing, and how all of that stuff works on a magic level. It's all in here, right? And so in this process, just why? Why does writing Jehovah's name backward have power? Or why does knowing the name of the spirit Mephistopheles give Dr. Faustus power to command his spirit? You read right after he calls him forth, right? Mephistopheles enters dressed as a devil. Dr. Faustus is talking to himself. I see there's virtue in my heavenly words. Again, the use of the word heavenly is sort of interesting there. Who would not be proficient in this art? How pliant is this Mephistopheles, full of obedience and humility. Such is the force of magic and my spells. No, Faustus, thou art conjurer laureate, that canst command great Mephistopheles. Right? So by the virtue of the power of his words, of his spells, he's able to command this demon. Now, it gets interesting though, because right after this, Mephistopheles denies that he has not been compelled to obey Faustus. Faustus asks him, Mephistopheles says here, "No, I came not hither of mine own accord. Faustus, did not my conjuring speeches raise thee?" So Mephistopheles says, "I didn't come here because you called me. I came here because Lucifer commanded me to come here." And Dr. Faustus asks, wait, didn't my conjuring compel you to come? Mephistopheles says, "That was the cause, yet per accident. For when we hear one rack the name of God, abjure the scriptures and his Savior Christ, we fly in hopes to get his glorious soul." So basically what he's saying is it has nothing to do with magic and everything to do with blasphemy. The devils will come if there's blasphemy going on. However, keep in mind that Mephistopheles lies quite often to Dr. Faustus. You'll see that as the play continues on. He's very tricky in his language, very tricky in his words. So we can't necessarily trust what he says here, that he wasn't compelled to come because of the spell. We don't actually know. But that is a question to be thinking about. Did the spell actually control him, or is he just saying that? All right, so here's where, if you read the Keith Thomas piece, this was in the back of the book, Conjuring in the Magical Tradition, and he's sort of giving just a little bit of context about how magic was viewed in the early modern period. Okay, here's a quote from here. "Instead of being regarded as an inanimate mass, the earth itself was deemed to be alive. The universe was peopled by a hierarchy of spirits and thought to manifest all kinds of occult influences and sympathies. The cosmos was an organic unity in which every part bore a sympathetic relation to the rest. Even colors, letters, and numbers were endowed with magical properties. The investigation of such phenomena was the primary task of the natural philosopher, and their employment for his own purposes was the distinguishing mark of the magician." So there is very much bleed. There's a lot of bleed here between what is science, what is philosophy, what is religion, and what is magic. The division between these is not very clear at all, right? As far as the early moderns are concerned, they could all be related, all be the same. Three main types of magical activity thus lay open: natural magic, concerned to exploit the occult properties of the elemental world; celestial magic, involving the influence of the stars, astrology and that sort of stuff; and ceremonial magic, an appeal for aid to spiritual beings. It's that third type of magic that Dr. Faustus is dabbling in. Ceremonial magic, which is appealing to spiritual beings. So that's what we're working with here. Language and symbols were believed to have power over spirits. Now, let's jump to Act 2, all right? Because Act 2, Scene 1, has another really interesting scene. This is where Dr. Faustus formalizes the sale of his soul to the devil. He sells his soul to the devil, literally, right? So Mephistopheles, bit of a tongue twister name, tells Faustus that the devil needs their agreement to be formalized in writing, which I think is really interesting. The devil wants this deal in writing. So Dr. Faustus, so he tells him that he needs to cut his arm. Dr. Faustus cuts his arm and uses his blood as ink. Now, for me, as someone who studies, like I study material textuality and the importance, like I look at paper type and ink type and binding type and the actual materials that go into producing texts, because I think lots of interesting meaning can be gained from that. So I think it is interesting to think about why blood? Why does blood make such a disturbing, it's clearly disturbing. Why does it make such a powerfully binding type of ink? Magical type of ink. Why is that? And that goes along, why does this need to be written at all in the first place? So remember back to Unit 2 when we talked about how sometimes speech was more trustworthy, considered more trustworthy than writing. Well, here clearly we're in a culture where writing is more trusted than speech. We've moved to that point in history. But it's interesting that it's been extended to the devil here. The devil himself is only trusting writing, wants this agreement in writing, written in blood. And so we get this amazing legal language that Faustus writes this deal in. I didn't highlight it, but it formalizes the exchange of Dr. Faustus's soul in exchange for Mephistopheles becoming his servant. And I love that Dr. Faustus uses this really formal legal language. Here it is. On these conditions following, first, that Faustus may be a spirit in form and substance. Secondly, da 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 da. I mean, like, it goes on for a whole paragraph, but it is all very legalese, right? And of course, there's all sorts of lawyer jokes we could insert here about lawyers being evil. I have to be careful about those kind of jokes. My husband is a lawyer. But it's also a sign that careful, formal language has binding power, which is interesting, right? So again, just reiterating this theme that language has power, whether magical or not, right? You must be careful in how you use your language. So this written document gets made, he delivers it to Mephistopheles, and then after that, once Mephistopheles is sort of bound as his servant, Dr. Faustus starts peppering him with questions. All the powers of hell at his disposal. He could do anything. He could become emperor of the world, whatever. And the very first thing Dr. Faustus wants is knowledge. He wants to learn about everything, right? So he's asking him what hell is like. And then he gets around to asking him for a wife. And actually, that's an interesting scene. We won't go into it, but Mephistopheles doesn't want to give him a wife for various reasons. So to distract him, he hands him a book, right? Super interesting. And they both look at it together. And Mephistopheles starts explaining the knowledge that's in this book. It's conjuring. The iterating of these lines brings gold. The framing of this circle on the ground brings whirlwinds, tempests, thunder, and lightning. Again, more language and more written symbols enacting power. Pronounce this thrice devoutly to thyself, and men in armor shall appear to thee. So Dr. Faustus asks, what about this? What about more other stuff? I would have a book wherein I can have these types of spells. And Mephistopheles is like, oh, it's here. They turn to a different part of the book. That happens 3 times. So this is a magic book teaching different types of spells. And then there's this very interesting line at the very end of the scene, second to last line. Faustus says, after they've finished looking in this book, "Oh, thou art deceived." It's really unclear what he means here. Really unclear. I mean, does he mean that Mephistopheles is deceiving him? Does it mean that Faustus recognized he's been deceived? Is there something in the book that is deceiving? I don't have a good answer here. I just think it's an interesting line to think about that I wanted to point out. Okay, in the very next scene, short little scene, but it's really comic and funny. If you haven't figured out, the character of Robin is the clown. He's sort of here for comedic relief, and he has stolen one of Dr. Faustus's books. And there's this funny exchange about how he doesn't know how to read, but he still trusts in the power of this book to, help him conjure a spirit to get all the local wenches in bed with him or something, right? He's convinced of the power of the book, regardless of whether he can read it or not. So that's just a funny little scene. Then we get to the final scene of Act 2. And this is where we jump back to Dr. Faustus, and we see him regretting his decision to sell his soul, right? Yes, seems like an obvious regret. And he's thinking about repenting. And to distract him, Mephistopheles shows him this pageant of the 7 deadly sins. That may have feel like that may have seemed like a super weird scene, just know that again, Marlowe is borrowing from that older morality play tradition where the good and evil angels come from. That's a fairly common trope in those morality plays, to have a pageant of 7 deadly sins. So just know that that's where that's coming from. Okay, but what I want you to pay attention to is, again, at the very end of this scene, Mephistopheles hands Faustus another book, right? He is always giving him books, which it's just super, super interesting. So more information for Faustus, more magic books, more potential sources of knowledge, right? But I mean, we don't get any details on this one. We don't get as many as the last one. Let's see what it say. In the meantime, take this book, peruse it thoroughly, and thou shalt turn thyself into what shape thou wilt. So you're right, they're magic books, but what else do they have in them? And what do these represent? And why? Why is Mephistopheles using books to teach Faustus? Why isn't he just explaining things himself or showing him visions or something, right? This is a play after all. Why did Marlowe write in the use of books of being so important in an exchange of knowledge between Mephistopheles and Faustus? You know, like handing Marlowe a book on stage doesn't seem nearly as exciting as showing him a vision of all sorts of things or actually acting the magic out. So I'm just pointing out that the books seem to be purposefully used and used with a very specific symbology in mind. So keep that in mind as you keep reading this play for next week. Keep thinking about these books and keep thinking about magic and about knowledge and about power. And hopefully next week we'll have some time to talk about religion, which is sort of a big theme of this book, right? We'll talk some more about all of that next week. I'm hoping that we'll be able to set up a Zoom meeting for next week so that those of you who are available, we can actually meet virtually in real time and have a better discussion about this play. So if that works out, save your questions for that. And I have to figure it out first. So more instructions will be coming next Monday, hopefully, if I can get it to work. We'll see. If not, it'll just be another video like this. For now, just leave your comments below. As usual, our little discussion in the comments section. Let me know what you found interesting from this play, what questions you have, what thoughts you had, and then also remember to respond to one of your classmates' comments by Friday. Okay, until next time, stay safe.